Judge Dilek, welcome to Tibettv. In today's weekly analysis, we will discuss the Wangdu's diary. Wangdu was a member of the Third Fact-Finding Delegation to Tibet in 1980. The original diary was written in Tibetan, which covered the full events of the delegation from June to October 1980. After 40 years, it is now translated into English by writer and poet Bhuchung D Sonam. Today, we will discuss the Wangdu's diary with its translator. Welcome to Tibettv, Bhuchung La.
Oh, thank you very much.
Bhuchung La, I have to begin by asking about the ideas behind this book. So what made you translate Wangdu's diary, and can you tell us the journey behind this book?
History, of course. History is really important. Sometimes we look at history as something that happened in the past, not so much what is happening now. But I think it's really important for us to consider what happened in the last 60 years and try to reconsider what happened. And this is one of the really important events that happened over the last 60 years, the fact that Tibetans in exile were able to go and visit and tour all across Tibet. So the evolution of the translation and publication of this diary happened via social media, and the writer's daughter, who is a Tibetan filmmaker based in Paris, she posted 2 pages from the diary in her social media, and I thought that it could be part of a book. And so we communicated with her and realized that there was a whole diary. And that's how we found the book, and eventually I translated and we published it. So yeah.
Okay, since Wangdu was a member of the Third Fact-Finding Delegation headed by Amachizu Pemala, if I'm not wrong, so what was the main mission of the delegation, and can you just summarize their major findings?
Well, yeah, there have been, as you know, a series of missions beginning in early 1979. This began with the, I think, meeting of Deng Xiaoping and His Holiness Elder Brother Gyaltsen Tundrup in the early 1979, during which Deng Xiaoping said that everything could be discussed except Tibet's independence. And that was how I think the whole evolution started. And the first fact-finding delegation went to Tibet in 1979, and the second went in early 80, and then the third also went in 1980. And they covered basically whole of Tibet. The core mission of the third fact-finding delegation was to find out the education status in Tibet, because Tibet just came out of Cultural Revolution, which started in 1966 and then ended in 1976. So after 10 years, then there was a kind of a more relaxed policy when Deng Xiaoping took over as the Chinese paramount leader in 1979. So he initiated what is now called the policy relaxation, both in China and also in Tibet. So during this, in the process of this political liberalization, series of fact-finding delegations went to Tibet, and third fact-finding delegation was required to find out what was the education status of Tibetan children in Tibet then. This was in the early time of the liberalization policy. Yeah.
Okay, Bhuchung La. During their visit to Tibet, they met 10th Pension Lama. So regarding the situation of Tibet back then, the 10th Pension Lama said, I quote, "We have had so much hardships here. We sat in our pens. At some point in time, we were forced to grow wheat and had to eat wheat flour. It was very hard," unquote. So how does this message reflect the situation of Tibetans in Tibet then?
I think it was really hard because third fact-finding delegation was tasked to find out, as I said, the education status. But it was in the process of traveling across Tibet for 3 months, they also visited factories and met with the 10th Pension Lama, Baba Pinzo Wangge, Abba Alo, Jahan Sheba, and Kungdang Rinpoche also. So in the process of this, I think they discovered many other things. And also the fact that Penchen Rinpoche made this statement has to do with his own experience, the fact that he was in prison for, I think, almost nearly 2 decades. And I think he was, at the time when third delegation went to Tibet, he was released only a year earlier. So all the experience that he had in the prison were fresh in his mind. And also the fact that he wrote the 70,000 character in 1962, because of which he suffered. So I think he had not only had the intimate experience of what was happening inside Tibet, but also his own experience in the prison. So all of this, I think, culminated in what he said in this statement.
Okay, Bhuchung La. So in Tibet, when they visited Tibet, so wherever they visited, Wangdu and his team, people they met were asking about the well-being of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, including the 10th Pension Lama. So how do you interpret this gesture from Tibetans in Tibet then?
I think it's now almost unanimous. I mean, it goes without saying that His Holiness, since he was recognized in 1935, I think the whole of Tibet basically recognized and looked up to him as the paramount leader. And although he had been in exile for all these years, that even given the fact that China has initiated all this political educations and political policy, economic policy, all of this did not fundamentally change Tibetan outlook towards His Holiness, and the fact that he is considered even now as the political leader and also the spiritual leader of Tibet.
Bhuchung La, I'm sure this book will fill lots of research gaps on Tibet for Tibetan scholars around the world. So how should they read this book? From what perspective?
I think it's hard to say, because each reader draws something out of the book based on their own political outlook, based on their own background. If, for example, a researcher who focuses on education in Tibet may get information on education policy then, and what were the kind of schools and number of students, the level of education, what languages were taught. But if you are an ordinary Tibetan, for example, then you may read as an experience of somebody who grew up in exile and went to Tibet, was fortunate enough to tour across Tibet, and based on that he wrote. So I think it's really difficult for me to say that this is how it should be read, or that should be how it should be read. So I think it depends upon each individual reader and researchers.
So Bhuchung La, we all know that China is always coming up with lots of narratives on Tibet. They always claim that there are lots of infrastructural developments in Tibet. But when we read this book, we can clearly see how poor infrastructural developments were going in Tibet back then. So how does this book counter China's positive narratives on Tibet's like infrastructural development?
There is now nothing positive about occupation, colonialism. I mean, the very fundamental idea of occupying another country is just that. They wanted to oppress the people, deny basic freedom. That has what happened. That has what has been happening inside Tibet since China took over Tibet. So I think whatever that China announces, whether it's political education or infrastructure development or any other policy, language policy, cultural policy, everything boils down to the fact that China does not really have any legitimacy to rule over Tibet. That's one of the reasons why they try so hard through all these different media, both in the international level and also inside Tibet and also outside, to try to impress people that they are there to make Tibet better for Tibetans. But it is clear from books like this that China has totally failed. And if it hasn't failed, if it succeeded in some ways, then there's no reason for Tibetans to take to the street, or 150 Tibetans to self-emanate. And so I think all of these make things very clear that China's occupation of Tibet hasn't worked for the Tibetans.
Okay, Bhuchung La, so before we end our discussion, I would like to ask you a brief question. So what impact do you expect to see from this book?
First and foremost, I think one of the reasons why I translated the book is to make sure that there has been an increasingly new generation of Tibetans growing up in the West who may not have enough Tibetan linguistics standard to read the original Tibetan. So that's one of the reasons why the translation took place. I hope it will act as a bridge for them to read the book, and then through this book to understand what happened in Tibet then, and then increase their affection, not only affection, but their desire to do something for Tibet, no matter where you are. So that is one of the reasons why I translated and hope that something of this kind will do for the younger Tibetans at least.
Thank you so much, Bhuchung La. So Bhuchung La spoke about the ideas behind this book, and he also spoke about the importance of this book, why he translated this book. So I personally read this book, so I wish to recommend this book to our audience. So thank you so much, Bhuchung La, for coming to Tibet TV studio for this wonderful interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.